All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, Nina, are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Nina Burrowes. Nina, welcome.
Thank you, Guy, for having me on the show.
You're welcome. I'm excited you're here. So Nina is a psychologist, author, and activist specializing in the psychology of sexual violence and relationship abuse. Nina is the author of The Courage to Be Me, an illustrated book about recovery from sexual abuse, Eyes Open to Sexual Abuse, What Every Parent Needs to Know, and the creator of the online course, How Do People Heal from Trauma? As an educator, Nina is keen to bring the trauma literature to a wider audience using illustration, video, events, and even a game show to help people build their understanding of trauma, consent, and relationships. She is co-founder, or founder actually, of the Consent Collective, a social enterprise delivering education resources. Nina, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. So happy to be here.
All right, awesome. So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are
I'm
currently.
from Portsmouth, which is a naval town on the south coast of England. So that is home for me.
Okay. And still there?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Oh, no, am I still there living
Yeah.
there? No, the where am I now question is getting more interesting. 8 months ago, my partner and I put all our stuff in storage and we've been traveling. So my answer to that question today is I'm in the Lake District in Cumbria, but if you'd asked me last week, it would have been Scotland, and next week we're in Devon.
So are you in like a van type thing?
We have a van just because we're traveling with a lot of stuff, but we're not sleeping in it.
Okay, awesome. Well, very cool. All right, so let's get into this. How the heck did you get into this topic?
I think my entry route was gravity because I feel like I fell into it. The particular terrain of sexual violence as a topic area, I'm not sure many kids at school are like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be an expert at that. I was completing my studies. I was doing my PhD. I knew that I didn't want a career in academia. And so on the horizon was this question of, well, what am I going to do with this PhD? Because I love psychology. And I was offered a job, which if you're doing a PhD, it's quite unusual to be offered a job outside of academia. And the job was with the prison service here in England and Wales. And it was a job doing research for the team that build and evaluate rehabilitation programs with sex offenders.
Hold on, interrupt you for a second. So you got your PhD in psychology?
Yep.
Okay, so from at some point you were like, I'm interested in psychology.
Yes. Okay. I took a winding route. I took a gap year between school and university, and that grew into 4 gap years because I was having so much fun. And for a while, I didn't think I'd go to university at all. I'd fallen in love with the outdoors, and I was working as an instructor, like canoeing and kayaking. And I was like, cool, this is me. But, after your 300th canoe session, the magic can go. But I realized that the thing I was falling in love with became less about the activities and much more about the people. The center I was at, we would do team building stuff. And the weeks I would always put my hand up to be on was we would have young people come in who were maybe in trouble. They'd been kicked out of school. For a lot of them, it was the first time they'd been in the countryside, let alone, climbed up a cliff face. And I was getting a lot out of that work. And so, after canoe session 300, I was like, you know what? I think I'll be a psychologist. And then so I started studying as a slightly mature student And I went straight through degree, PhD, and then came out the end, as I say, with this job, working for the prison service. And I remember my thought at the time was like, I'd love to work for the prison service, because I wanted to do something applied, and that felt like a good fit for me. But I didn't choose the sex offender side of it, and I was like, I'm gonna try and transfer out of that team as quick as possible. But I find myself 15 years later still very much in the terrain of sexual harm and relationship abuse, but having explored it through many other lenses now, including, of course, that of the survivor.
So you got into that field of specialization or working with that population. At some point you were like, I'm not going to do this, yet you stayed.
Yeah, I was really, the opportunity came up and I was like, I'm going to take the opportunity, but I don't think this is going to be the right path for me. But the second I started the job as a psychologist, it's such it's fascinating terrain. It's interesting. It's important. I found
What about specifically? What about it fascinates you?
I think that question at the time, working with the population of people who are causing sexual harm, why would you do that to somebody else? How is that, if we understand these things, it's almost like, how is that serving you? Mm-hmm. How is that helping you? And also the journey that people would need to go through. I think if you really want to understand integrity in a human being, like sitting with the very worst of ourselves, people who've caused sexual harm and are able to own that and say, yes, that was me, I did do that, I'm also these other things, and today this is who I'm trying to be. I think that's, it's an epic human story right there of integration. So I found the work fascinating. But I also noticed that people tended to stay in their silos. You either work with the people causing harm or you work with the victims of that harm. And I was curious, what would it be like to travel around a bit, which I guess is what I'm doing now in a van. But, so I started volunteering at my local rape crisis center on the helpline, to see what lens would I have if I had this broader understanding. And yeah, that's proven to be how I like to work. I kind of have followed the topic areas wherever they take me. And since Me Too, they take me anywhere. I could be going to a crisp factory tomorrow to talk about sexual harassment in the workplace. Like really, this conversation is everywhere, which is great. It's time for that.
What is it about working with perpetrators? I guess the question is, that seems, to a lot of us, it seems, wow. Like, why would you want to do that? How could you do that? That must be really hard and challenging and difficult. What is it about you that allowed you to do that? I mean, you said, this was fascinating, and of course it is, but share with us more about your entree into that and your ability to sit with that.
I guess for me, that was something I had to discover on the job, because, that wasn't a calling for me. So my initial reaction was one of resistance. However, I did find that I was able to, it was my job to meet the person, to be able not just to sit with them and not be afraid, but to meet them with that curiosity and that openness. And it was my job, because I was conducting research. Of course, it's voluntary for the individuals. They don't have to talk to me. And so how do you create an environment where someone is willing to talk to you? And I guess the key thing was, can I understand what this individual has done, but still not allow that to dominate every thought I'm having about them, every question I'm asking, but to be fair, I feel like the biggest challenge wasn't necessarily doing that work. It was the moment I decided to then expose myself to the victim survivor side of this, and to look at it, to see, both of those stories, because then you see the pain that is caused, and you've met some of the people that have caused that type of pain in others. And I find that, if I was going to use one word, I guess I would say really it's a privilege to be put in these positions as we are when we do this profession. We get to encounter these individuals and have those kinds of interactions and conversations, and we get to do that learning. And that's my kind of overall sense of it. I haven't now worked with perpetrators for a while. When you're in the community, obviously there's an access issue. So most of my work these days is with people who've experienced harm, and the word privilege still would be one that would dominate that narrative for me.
With the understanding that everyone's different and all these cases are different, can you share with us maybe what you learned from an interaction with someone has caused harm? Maybe something that, I don't know, surprised you, or maybe not even surprised you, but what does it take to do that? Because a lot of times we hear that if we're talking about sexual assault or if we're talking about rape, right, this isn't an act of sex. It's an act of what? Anger or violence.
Yeah, power, control.
Right.
I think what I took from it was, of course, this isn't a homogenous group. So I had interactions with individuals who I'd be so happy never to meet again. So maybe more what a lay person might imagine, like this person that my body was not comfortable in their presence at all. There was no congruence to being with them. They were obviously playing games, felt very manipulative. Some of the things they said were very disturbing. Perhaps it's not a surprise to hear someone say that after having conducted an interview with a convicted sex offender. Others, though, really, I guess I got to see the brokenness, the place where they found themselves. I mean, to be in prison serving a sentence for a sexual offense, this is a desperate place for anyone, to be in their life's journey. And for those individuals, there would have been a story of how they arrived there, and there's going to be an epic story afterwards too. Society tends not to forgive and forget. So it's, regardless of your length of sentence, you really have a life sentence. You have these, what has this done to every relationship you have? So it's really, what I notice, having had the privilege of exploring, I don't want to stick too much to the binary. I feel like we too often talk of perpetrators and victims as if society's got nothing to do with this. Of course, it's much more complex than that. But having had the opportunity to explore the psychology around how does somebody heal when they are sexually harmed by someone else, and why would somebody do that to someone else? Like, actually, what's really striking is the parallels in terms of the psychological terrain. The trauma is all over that. Pain is all over that. Integrity, isolation. The perpetrator is really paying forward their own pain, often. And so this kind of healing journey, there's a surprising amount of parallels between those two groups. Of course, there are also so many differences as well. Like, one group has got choice over all of this, and the other group absolutely doesn't. The very definition of the act. But in terms of the human psyche, as a psychologist, I feel like the key themes are surprisingly similar.
On your website, which is really interesting. It's ninaburrows.com, NinaBurrowes. Really interesting little book on authenticity. Another one, The Courage to Be Me. Tell me about this topic, this theme, because I find this very interesting, especially within the context of trauma.
So the Courage to Be Me was it was born out of a research project that I did with people, survivors of abuse, who were undergoing group therapy. And I was able to conduct some research looking, evaluating the group therapy. But the experience of meeting these women and listening to their stories of just not just recovery, but also encountering each other. So often when people are healing from these experiences, they're doing it either in isolation or just with their therapist. Certainly also when, back then group was less common. And so what's it like to meet somebody else who's also on a healing journey, and how does that help you on your path? And as part of the process of being the researcher, I had just this such clear message, like more people need to know about this. And it really made me think of the individuals out there who have experienced sexual harm, but they're not ready to phone a helpline or ask for help. They maybe don't have the words for what's happened to them. They're blaming themselves. Like, there are so many barriers to accessing support. So how do you create a resource for those individuals who are perhaps at the very early stage or pre-disclosure to themselves, let alone anyone else? And so that's what The Courage to Be Me is. It's like a graphic novel. It's completely illustrated, and it's inspired by this research project. And it tells the story of a group of women who come together and how they learn from bearing witness to each other's journey. I feel like it's incumbent upon those of us who have the opportunity to try to share the trauma literature as widely as possible, which I'm sure, Guy, given your podcast, is something that resonates with you. So in the book, there's some psychoeducation stuff, why didn't I fight, and why is this still affecting me? Like, important information that people need. And that process of creating the book and taking on the challenge of illustrating it all and thinking, well, I know what that is in words, but what does that look like as an image? I found it really hard, but really beautiful. And having created one book, I now have 3 illustrated books, and I feel like illustration has got so much to offer this terrain. It's gentle, it's quite abstract. You can see what you're ready to see. I've had such a lot of feedback from therapists who use the book with their clients, and also, of course, survivors themselves, about how they felt seen by seeing themselves in the book. And I think some of the best feedback is also that wider ripple effect. I read the book with my mum so that my mum could understand what I'm going through. Like those kinds of things, I think it's so important that we help not just the client group that we know we have a responsibility towards, but their friends and family and partners, because that can make a massive impact. So yeah, I became a bit of a cartooning psychologist there for a bit.
Nina, this is, obviously you're so passionate about this topic. Why is this important to you?
I think the importance of the topic, there's the headline stuff. It's like, this is impacting so many people, and this can be a huge earthquake in someone's life, like proper existential change for some individuals, for too many. And I feel like it's been a gift to have had access to this terrain, to be able to make a contribution, to be of service to a topic area that is so huge and so big. It is so political. This is not simple, I'm going to do good terrain. You as a person with a platform in this space, you need to operate with integrity, because you can cause a lot of harm along the way by, with your good intentions. So I feel like those things really work for me. But the exciting stuff, I feel actually, I think the thing that keeps me here is how personally beneficial it is for me as a human being to understand this material and to live this material. I feel like understanding that my body needs messages of safety, that I need to work and have practices for my own regulation, that, what a gift. I feel like it's my job to kind of nurture my mental, spiritual, and emotional well-being in order to be able to then go do the other job, right? And so I know often in this space we talk about how vicarious trauma and how we must look after ourselves. I also feel like there's an awful lot of vicarious healing going on. I feel like personally, mostly a massive beneficiary of stepping into this terrain. So I find it inspiring, and I think it's moved from, oh, isn't it nice to do good, to, wow, isn't this epic? And isn't it kind of awesome to be in this terrain? It's actually full of the most beautiful human stories I've ever encountered. I am constantly bowled over by stories that are fundamentally, they're about love. They're about courage. They're about us at our best. Like, who wouldn't want to stay here? It's great.
What is it though? I mean, there's something about you that allows you, allows you to do this. Before you answer that, let me hold on. Can you share kind of an early clinical error you made? I'm gonna piece of cookie caught in my throat. Like when you first started, my guess is you've grown, matured.
Yeah, I definitely had to go through a process, and I can see it now when I entered this space, having, fresh out of university. I was full of what university had taught me. I had absolutely no political awareness at all. So then my lens was, it was very clinical. It's very, I have a responsibility and I'm here to do good, like a little neoliberal. And really, I hadn't taken any units, and certainly wasn't encouraged to at university around gender. And I didn't think that was a problem, to be working in this terrain, but not using the word patriarchy ever. And so I feel like I could have stayed working with perpetrators, and probably, maybe I wouldn't have had the growth spurt that I did encounter once I entered the world of rape crisis centers and the politics that, rightly sits there. Although I mean, part of my fear is it's becoming less political and more clinical at the moment. But so I feel like that, not so much a mistake, but my God, I was naive. And now I look back and I can, I guess with compassion, I can say I can see the growth. And I'm grateful for the individuals that helped me on my journey there, because I had a lot of learning and growing to do. And now, like, if you read my bio, the word activist will be there, and I would never have used that. And I would have been worried what my colleagues would have thought of me if I'd used that. But, once you've started cartooning, you start to worry less about what your colleagues think.
Why is that word important for you? Or why is being an activist important to you?
I think this is political work. I think if you choose to get into the mental health terrain, if you're working as a therapist, I think therapy is a political act. You're doing that consciously or not. But, what is mental health? What is mental illness? What is being well? What is this relationship we're doing? What power do you hold? How does gender and age and ethnicity and disability play into those therapeutic relationships? Like, that's on the kind of one-to-one side. But to give you an example of how political my particular terrain is, this week we've had new guidance in England and Wales about how therapists are slightly more obliged to hand over therapy notes to the criminal justice system for somebody who's reported rape, just in case they say something that fundamentally might undermine their case. You don't get more political than that as a profession. At what point are we agents for the state? At what point are we truly on our client's side? And what does it mean to be safe if your client has experienced sexual violence? It means a lot more than having a desire to help them. It's, there's so much politics in all of this. And so the word activist is there with pride, because, thanks to being pointed in the right direction, I realize that fundamentally, given the state of our society in this particular topic area, whether I choose to recognize it or not, what I'm doing is a political act. And for me, that consciousness around it makes me that tiny bit safer.
You have this presence of openness and compassion and allowance. And my guess is you bring this into your work. Were you always able to bring that into your work?
I feel in some ways I haven't changed much from the 14-year-old that I was, and in other ways I've changed a lot. I've got a niece, and when I hang out with her, I wonder if she reminds me of myself, because she's quiet, but she's watching everything, and it's like the head on her shoulders is older than her years. And I feel like, I think I was that kind of kid. I kind of, so I've always had a level of self-confidence. That confidence has never been, I'm going to get this right, I'm going to do really well at this. The confidence has always been, hey, if I mess this up, that's okay. And I feel like part of that actually might be because my parents had their own business growing up. And I think as a child, that gave me a particular lens. Like, no one was telling them what to do or how to do it, or that they were doing a good job. They were really, we would see them at home. They were making decisions and doing the best they can, and they were making mistakes. And I think some of that rubbed off. So I think that, and I'm just curious. Like, I haven't left school. I'm still learning. And I feel like that curiosity, it really helps, because I don't at all think I've got the answers, but I do think I'm asking some interesting questions. And that's a lot of our work is about the questions we ask.
Appreciate that. Kind of as we wind down here, another book you have on your website is called The Little Book on Authenticity. How did that come about?
I was just playing. I was just having so much fun. And I was actually learning to draw at the time. And so creating a book gave me a focus. But I think I'm deeply in love with all of these wonderful things we get to be curious about as psychologists, you know, authenticity and courage and choice, they are so fascinating. And so that book, you know, I spend so much of my time thinking about abuse. That book was giving myself permission to create something that actually was not centered on sexual violence, and had a different center. And I hope to create other ones like that one day.
The topic struck me and is continually inspires me, because I think it's a crucial one, both for therapists and clients alike, or survivors alike. But what is your experience in the importance of authenticity and cultivating that for therapists who work with trauma?
I think it's essential. I think people can tell if you're not being authentic. They can, I think especially survivors, you know, like very sensitive to the idea of being groomed or manipulated, or someone isn't truly being who they're pretending to be. And so for me, that's a really important part of it. But I think it's also, for me, authenticity has also got this adventure side of it. This adventure of where you actually get to decide who you want to be in this world. And I guess one way of understanding my career path is I've never waited for anyone to give me permission to do the things I'm doing. You know, I think there's something about really knowing if you have the privilege that I do of, you know, mostly I can do so much with my career. I can make choices, and the choices I make are important. And, you know, to what extent am I being me when I make those choices? And to what extent am I just trying to please people? And so, you know, if you look at the titles of the book, The Courage to Be Me, and then the little bit on authenticity, I think a lot of this is really about, are you really being you? Or are you playing this game of pretending to be somebody that, you know, probably nobody else is watching as attentively as you think? And I think this is a path that clients are on too. And I think for a lot of clients in this group is, especially if they experienced abuse at an early age, well, you know, how do you can't really separate me from the abuse. So what is my authenticity? If this shaped me. And so I think it's, yeah, always with the work, it's so hard. It's so painful. And it can also have these elements of being playful, and gorgeous and loving and kind and beautiful. And yeah, cartoons have a great way of being able to show that.
Awesome. Nina, so awesome meeting you and getting to speak with you. I'm so glad you came on this podcast. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, check out my website, as you said, or find me on social media. And the Consent Collective is the organization that I founded. So either of those are great places to find me and my work.
Okay, awesome. Now, I'd love to share the links to your books, if that's okay.
That would be great.
Okay, I can do that.
There's also the How Do People Heal from Trauma online course there too, which people might find interesting as well.
Okay, and that's a 2-day online course for survivors, support workers, and therapists. So that's kind of evergreen. People can go on there and just sign up.
Yeah, they can go there, sign up, and find out about it.
All right, and we'll link that up too. Nina, love to have you back. And you'll probably be in a different
God knows where I'll be.
But it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.